There were a spate of these creepy crawling home invasions before the murders took place, and even another instance just after the LaBianca murders. Alice LaBianca, who was the first wife of Leno LaBianca, told author Bill Nelson that she was left with the task of cleaning up the LaBianca home after the murders. Now, she said that one morning she returned to the home to find that one of the bedroom doorknobs had been placed in the fridge, and logs from the fireplace had been moved around to form a pattern, none of which had been the case the previous evening when she had left the house. So, this particular brand of gaslighting was used by the Manson family, and based on everything I've previously outlined about Manson, he is the host of a demon. So it's fitting that he would display this demonic pattern of behaviour. Targeted individuals being subject to this brand of gaslighting therefore reveals something about the nature of the perps who are doing this, and I'll give you a hint: it ain't human. Other things targets often report is hearing their neighbours talking bad about them, people giving them dirty looks, noise campaigns, which involves people in the neighbourhood becoming, let's just say, unnaturally loud, seemingly all at the same time. Lights constantly being flashed into windows, people call this brighting. Then there is the use of voice to skull, voices in the head. These voices are often very hostile and will try to drive the target to suicide, and in many cases murder, or at least harm in some way or the other, be it to themselves or to others. There are instances where the voices appear to be benevolent, but for the most part they are evil and abusive. And they tend to start out giving running commentary on what the target's doing or what they're thinking, and it will escalate from there. They might try to convince the target that they are the CIA or some special Black Ops agent. They may also claim to be a part of the target's own psyche. That's very unlikely, as often they speak in terms completely unfamiliar or foreign to the subject. Other times they may claim to be aliens, God, the devil, Jesus, whatever they need to be for whatever it is they're trying to achieve. Now, while I'm familiar with the fact that yes, the government has technology capable of doing this and have been known to do this, let's not forget that people have been experiencing these voices in the head for time immemorial, and the hostility of the voices is generally a theme. And people will say, well, that's because they're schizo. Fine, they may well be schizo, but what you're missing when you say that is that if you had someone yammering on in your ear 24 hours a day, then you'd probably go schizo as well. Being tuned in to something that others can't hear does not, by default, make you insane. It can drive you insane. Any form of torture can drive you insane. But the fact alone doesn't mean that you're insane. It's the way that you react and the way that your perception is altered, if you allow it, which determines your sanity. And that seems fundamentally to be what the more hostile voices are trying to do, to manipulate your perception for their own ends, to hijack your will. Whether they have to play good cop, bad cop, or good cop and bad cop to achieve this, however they go about it, that seems to be the goal. It comes down to the same thing, the loss of your sovereignty. The fact that this phenomena so often accompanies gang stalking or organised stalking or whatever you want to call it is very telling. The voices, like psychopaths, and like the overall manifestations of gang stalking as a whole, and like the creepy crawling of the Manson family, are essentially gaslighting the target. Now we've tied together psychopaths, gang stalking, and voices with the common thread, this demonic pattern of gaslighting. Let's explore the next area that gaslighting is commonplace, and that's poltergeist activity. I'm sure most of you know what a poltergeist is. The word itself means noisy ghost, and it refers to an intelligence of some kind or the other that moves and throws things around. Some people think that these things are ghosts. Parapsychologists will tell you that they're manifestations of psychokinesis, in which a particular person is unconsciously causing the phenomenon to occur. Typically the activity will centre around a prepubescent child, although there are many exceptions to that rule. There is a wide range of phenomena associated with poltergeist activity, from things moving and flying around, banging and rapping on walls, things breaking and smashing, to things actually dematerialising in one place and then rematerialising someplace else. Poltergeist activity is distinctly separate from what is termed residual haunting. A residual haunting is just a kind of playback from the past, a projection of some past event, somehow recorded in the fabric of space-time, if you will, which under certain unknown conditions becomes momentarily visible, hence ghosts appearing fully clothed, vehicles and ships appearing, things like that. These are not conscious beings, they're just essentially a kind of hologram. Poltergeists are a different type of haunting altogether, in that they are an intelligence of some kind, as opposed to a type of cosmic CCTV playback. There are also what some call demonic or inhuman hauntings. Now the lines between poltergeist and demonic hauntings are very blurry, as demonic hauntings usually start out exactly the same as poltergeist hauntings, so there's reason to believe that they may be the same thing. I'm using the word demonic simply as a descriptive term for a negative inhuman entity. I don't claim to know what they actually are, but their behaviour fits the criteria of psychopathic gaslighting and torment. So I'll judge that tree by its fruits, and in the case of these specific inhuman entities, if that's what they are, those fruits are rotten to the core. Now, these spiritual attacks tend to start out the same way. Things may start to go missing, oftentimes they'll reappear someplace else. Things may be moved around, rearranged. Objects are sometimes found stacked on top of one another. Lights flick on and off by themselves. Some people are amused by the antics of the entity at first, but then the situation will take a turn for the worst and the activity will increase. Footsteps will be heard, banging and scratching on walls, beds are shaken, and this can happen like clockwork at times. Then the entity will start to physically attack, biting, scratching, pushing, punching, slapping. Another thing that they'll do is mimic speech. They might call you in the voice of someone else living in the house with you. Could be your mother, your father, your sister, brother, you name it. More often than not, they'll cause a lot of trouble doing this as well. An example being the Smell family haunting. The Smells lived in a duplex in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. Jack and Janet Smell, along with their children on one side, and Jack's parents Mary and John on the other side. One of the things that the entity would do is mimic the voices of Jack and Janet and make it sound as if they were arguing amongst each other, shouting and swearing at each other. So Mary, hearing this coming through the wall, would get upset when she would hear this, as it was completely uncharacteristic of Jack and Janet to hurl obscenities at each other. So initially, this would cause tension among the family. That is until the activity ramped up and they knew the true source of the staged argument was the entity. It was gaslighting them. Then there is the apparitions. Similar to voice mimicry, these beings can take on any form that they like. They can appear as friends, family, alive or dead, and they can appear as animals. Strange, grotesque creatures, absurd-looking beasts, or even beings of light. One of the most common, perhaps default forms that they'll take is a black, cloudy mass. It's probable that they'll assume the form of their target's worst fears. It's also probable that for the purpose of discrediting the victim, they will appear as ridiculous-looking creatures. I'll refer again to the Smell haunting, where the entity, at one time, took on the form of a half two-legged horse and a half human-like torso, but furry and with an animal snout, glowing eyes and horns, standing at around 7 feet tall. Now, Jack Smell described it in the book, The Haunted, as looking like a, quote, horse and a human had been grafted together in a real crude way, unquote. Now, of course, on the face of it, it sounds like a made up, over the top bullshit. But that is the whole point. It serves the dual purpose of scaring the hell out of the target and discrediting them in the eyes of the public. Two birds with one stone. It's for exactly the same reason that a victim of ritual abuse will be abused by a perpetrator wearing a scary looking mask, or even the mask of, say, a Disney character. It's so the victim will look silly when they say they were abused by a devil, or Mickey Mouse. These entities are not stupid. They know what makes us tick and how to manipulate human psychology. Another tactic that they'll use is sleep deprivation. They like to wait until the victim's just about to fall asleep and then bang on a wall, or make a noise to startle them back awake. Sometimes they'll wake the target in the early hours and terrorise them. Surprise, surprise, this is something that abusers like to do as well. If what I believe about psychopaths and sociopaths being vessels for these entities is true, then it's no wonder that the pattern of behaviour is the same on both a physical and a metaphysical level. I'll give you an example. The following account comes from the book Venus and the Dark Side. Now, I read an account from this book earlier on, and the book details many such accounts of domestic abuse. And please keep in mind that this book is in no way supernatural or conspiracy related. It's simply a book about, in this case, female on male abuse, which is what makes it so intriguing and lends credence to what I'm suggesting here. Here's the account. Quote, I didn't realise it at the time, but my wife was having an affair. She told me repeatedly that I was sexually inadequate, which really didn't help me want to make love with her. She would routinely ridicule the size of my manhood, my inability to perform when it suited her. I went to see a therapist at her insistence, and this in itself destroyed my already dented self-esteem. My lack of expertise and my inability to give her pleasure was thrown at me every few days. She repeatedly said, if you knew what my lesbian lovers did, it might make you at least tolerable in bed. I was made to feel that she wanted an exercise machine, not a lover. I distinctly remember one time she just sat up in bed with her arms folded. I must have hallucinated. She transformed herself into a queen cobra, as opposed to a king cobra. My queen cobra was slightly smaller, but far more venomous. It was, although she was only a moment away from making a strike. As her husband, it was my job to get into bed with her. Things had been bad for a long time. Nothing I did was enough. Everything was my fault. No matter what I said, it would be twisted into something that would astound me. How could she possibly interpret what I'd said to mean that? She was always spoiling for a fight. One time she punched me while I was laying in the bath. She insisted that she watched me going to the toilet. I'd never let her. When that didn't work, she verbally abused me for not flushing several times during a sit-in. Then she started going out a lot. At first I didn't figure out why. I was just so relieved to have some peace and quiet. But she started coming home late and full of hatred. And when she'd been drinking, she was worse. Her favourite trick was to stand over me while I slept and yell abuse at me, only inches away from my ear. I cannot adequately describe how terrifying it was to be woken up in that way. Once I went crazy. I was out of control. I attacked her and I kicked her legs repeatedly, caused multiple bruises. She told me that she had reported me to the police and they had photographed the bruises. She never provided proof for this, but she used it as a threat against me if I refused to do what she told me. My life was a misery. One night she threatened to stab me in my sleep. I didn't dare fall asleep, I was so terrified. I knew she could have done it. The next day, I had to leave work because I was so tired. I double locked the door when I got home and I fell into a deep sleep. And the next thing I knew, I was woken by 2 police officers in my bedroom. They cautioned me for barring my wife from her matrimonial home. She had called my office earlier and was told that I had gone home, and she then took time off work to come home and taunt me. When she couldn't get in, she went to the police, who smashed down the door. I'd heard nothing. Unquote. Now, I won't read that man's account in its entirety, because my intention is only to highlight what is necessary for what I'm trying to prove here. But essentially, I read this man's story for two reasons. One is to point out that sleep deprivation is a part of this demonic pattern that I'm outlining, and I'll return to the subject shortly. And two, what this man describes as a hallucination. Because he says that he hallucinated that his wife transformed into a queen cobra. Now think about that for a minute. Since when did people just start randomly hallucinating? Is it not possible that for a split second this man caught a glimpse of this entity's serpentine true form? Is it not possible that calling it a hallucination is just his way of trying to rationalise what he saw? As far as I'm concerned, that explanation is at least as plausible as a sudden random hallucination out of the clear blue sky for no apparent reason. Unless someone was slipping acid into this guy's water supply, there's no reason that I know of that he should hallucinate that his wife transformed into a reptile. Coming from a non-conspiracy related source, that is very strange. Now, on this same line of thought, famous demonologist couple Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were involved in the previous case that I mentioned of the Smell haunting, as well as the Amityville haunting and several other high profile cases, stated in their 1980 publication, The Demonologist, and I'll preface this by saying this is not a book written by the Warrens, but is about them and composed of interviews with them and in their words. But on page 115, Ed Warren describes what he says is the true form of a demon. Quote, Ed speaks of the demonic spirit showing itself only rarely in preternatural form. What does the demonic spirit look like? The question is an uncomfortable one for him to answer. Although the spirit can project itself in any form it chooses, says Ed, its appearance is an abomination, a monstrosity. To see what's really behind the phenomena is not something to be desired. To actually see the demonic is to feel ruin. What shows is something distinctly preternatural in appearance. Something real enough as you see it, but yet something not of this world. But what does it ultimately look like? Ultimately, Ed answers, with great reluctance, it's not human. It is inhuman. It has scales. It looks like a reptile. That's it, he cautions. I won't complete the rest of that image. Unquote. So, here we have yet another non-conspiracy related source, and granted, it's all anecdotal, but from the year 1980, before David Icke made reptilians a widely known subject. Just something to ponder over. Anyway, returning to the initial point, sleep deprivation and waking someone suddenly with loud noise or abuse is, without a doubt, part of this demonic pattern of behaviour. We see this in the story the man who was being abused by his wife gave, with her standing over him while he slept, waking him up by screaming abuse in his ear. So, demonic hauntings are an area that this behaviour is exhibited. Abuse is an area that it is exhibited. And yes, gang stalking is yet another area where sleep deprivation is utilised. For targeted individuals, the methods used are exactly the same as those who are under demonic or inhuman attack. Banging and rapping on walls, just at the precise moment the target begins to fall asleep. Or at times when they are already asleep and the banging, scratching and noise in general is used to startle them back awake. Adrenaline from the shock makes it a lot harder for the target to get back to sleep. Now, the next area in which demonic hauntings and gang stalking cross over is apparitions. I've already discussed apparitions in terms of hauntings, but demonic and strange apparitions are also reported by victims of gang stalking. The only difference is the interpretation. Targeted individuals tend to attribute these apparitions to directed energy weapons and satellite technology. The projection of holograms into the target's home by shadowy covert organisations, or by people that have somehow hacked into this high-tech weaponry, or have access to it and are using it against them for whatever the reason may be. So again, same phenomena, different interpretation. What I'm going to do now is list the various gaslighting techniques in which all of these areas cross over. Demons, bang on walls, mess with lights, move things, hide things, and stack objects in piles. Abusers and psychopaths, bang on walls, mess with lights, move things, hide things, stack objects in piles. Gang stalkers, bang on walls, mess with things, move things around, hide things, and stack objects in piles. Just to verify that last statement about gang stalkers stacking things in piles, if you go to a video here on YouTube called Intro to Gang Stalking, Tactics and Personal Experiences, and scroll down in the comment section, you'll find a comment written by a user named T-Bar. That's T-E-E bar with a double R. If you read his comment, there is a point which I've highlighted here which says, quote, "One time I woke up on my couch and there was a pyramid of tomatoes just stacked in the middle of the floor." Unquote. While I realise that anyone on the internet can essentially just say or make up anything they want, I do find this especially intriguing, considering that this phenomena is widely reported by people experiencing poltergeist/demonic hauntings. But this person experienced it as an aspect of gang stalking, and if he experienced this, there's a fair chance that a good few others have as well, because this object stacking, this creepy crawling, is an obvious aspect of this demonic pattern that I'm talking about. Continuing with the pattern, demonic entities mimic speech of friends, family, neighbours, etc., etc. Victims of gang stalking report hearing friends, family and neighbours talking about them and putting them down. Now I want you to remember what happened to the Smells. The demon mimicked the voices of family members and stirred up trouble by doing it. The same tactics are being employed here. They're trying to make targeted individuals feel like everyone around them is in on it, so that they accuse people in public and look crazy, maybe even attack someone and land themselves either in prison or a mental hospital. It's an isolation tactic, and it's very demonic. Let's also remember that the demonic is hive-minded. It can make people, particularly empty vessels, say things that to the person saying it are innocent, but to the target who is supposed to hear it is threatening or demeaning. Not everyone's a conscious perp. Most are just easier for entities to use as unwitting vessels at the right time and the right place. Moving on. Victims of demonic hauntings report foul odours. Victims of gang stalking report foul odours. Victims of demonic hauntings report rape and sexual assault by unseen forces. Victims of gang stalking report rape and sexual assault by unseen forces, usually attributed to directed energy weapons. Victims of demonic hauntings report strange marks or scratches appearing on their bodies. Victims of gang stalking report strange marks or scratches appearing on their bodies, once again, usually attributed to directed energy weapons. As for abusers/psychopaths, while there may be no salient pattern of speech mimicry emergent or immediately obvious in the current associative model, they are known to put words in the mouths of others, with a view to isolate their victim from friends and family, to convince their target that people have said things about them which they have not. So the tactic, while not manifestly the same in its implementation, is the same in its intent, which is paramountly what matters here. That being the case, we can ascribe a certain form of speech mimicry to abusers, which, similar enough to that which I have hitherto attributed to the other two categories, we will call strawman speech mimicry. As for rape and sexual assault, abusers are indelibly linked with this, so that goes without saying. Last of all, I'll add apparitions to the manifold list of traits that betoken gaslighting in all of its categories. And I say this because Although you might not immediately connect apparitions with abusers as readily as you would the other two categories, there is an association in that some people have been known to witness their abusers seemingly shapeshift, like the man whose wife transformed into a cobra, a momentary bleed through, you might say. And that is, after all, a type of apparition. Anyway, I think I've sufficiently proved my point. Now, if you want to know at least some of what is going on here, it has to do with your field. I briefly mentioned Rupert Sheldrake and what he calls the morphogenetic field earlier on. Well, that's pretty much what I'm referring to.